The autumn wind cut through the airfield at Tempelhof like a knife through butter. It was September 1940, and Berlin still held the intoxicating scent of victory. Oberst Friedrich Müller stood at the edge of the runway, watching his men board the Heinkel He 111 bombers lined up like metallic birds of prey. At 42 years old, Friedrich had seen combat in the Great War, had survived the chaos of Verdun, and now found himself commanding Kampfgeschwader 53, one of the Luftwaffe's most decorated bomber units. The He 111 was a marvel of German engineering when it first rolled off the assembly lines in 1935. Its sleek design, twin engines and distinctive glazed nose made it instantly recognizable. Friedrich remembered the pride he felt during the early campaigns in Poland and France. Back then, losses were minimal. The bombers flew with fighter escorts, faced outdated defenses, and returned home with stories of easy victories. The crew morale was high, almost euphoric. They believed they were invincible, but everything changed when the Battle of Britain began. Friedrich lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly, watching the smoke dissipate into the gray morning sky. His adjutant, Hauptmann Klaus Weber, approached with a clipboard clutched tightly in his hands. Klaus was 26, eager, and still possessed the naive optimism of youth. He had joined the Luftwaffe believing in the propaganda, in the superiority of German technology and tactics. Klaus, "We lost another 3 crews last night," Friedrich said quietly, not taking his eyes off the bombers. Klaus shifted uncomfortably. "The British defenses are stronger than we anticipated, Herr Oberst. Their radar systems, the Spitfires and Hurricanes, they are everywhere. Our intelligence underestimated them." Friedrich crushed his cigarette beneath his boot. "Underestimated, that is a generous word. Klaus, our boys are flying into a meat grinder." The He 111, for all its early success, was now revealing its fatal flaws. It was too slow, maxing out at just 270 miles per hour when fully loaded with bombs. Its defensive armament consisted of machine guns operated by crew members, who were also responsible for navigation, bombing, and communication. Against the nimble British fighters that could reach speeds of over 350 miles per hour, the He 111 was a lumbering target. The bombers flew in tight formations, hoping their combined defensive fire would protect them. But British pilots had learned to attack from angles the gunners could not cover effectively. Inside the barracks, the air crews were preparing for the day's mission. Lieutenant Hans Adler, a 23-year-old pilot from Munich, sat on his bunk polishing his flight goggles. His hands trembled slightly. This would be his 8th mission over England. 3 of his training classmates had already been killed. 2 more were missing, presumed dead after their bomber was shot down over the English Channel. Hans's bombardier, Feldwebel Ernst Hoffmann, entered the room carrying 2 cups of ersatz coffee. Ernst was older, 35, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War where he had flown in the Condor Legion. He had seen what modern air warfare could do. "Drink this. It tastes like dirt, but it is warm," Ernst said, handing Hans the cup. Hans took it gratefully. "Do you think we will make it back today, Ernst?" Ernst sat down heavily. "We always make it back, Hans. We are too stubborn to die." But they both knew the statistics were grim. Bomber Command was losing aircraft at an alarming rate. The replacement crews arriving from training schools were younger, less experienced, rushed through abbreviated programs because the losses demanded constant reinforcement. The veterans like Ernst could see it in their eyes, that mixture of fear and forced bravado. The briefing room was thick with cigarette smoke when Friedrich entered. 48 men stood at attention, 6 complete crews ready for the day's raid. The target was London's Docklands, a strategic objective but one heavily defended by anti-aircraft batteries and fighter squadrons. Friedrich unrolled the map and began explaining the route, the timing, the formation they would maintain. He spoke with authority, but inside he felt the weight of knowing that not all these men would return. The losses were not just about inferior speed or armament. The Luftwaffe had made critical strategic errors. They had switched from attacking RAF airfields, which was crippling British fighter capabilities, to bombing cities. This gave the RAF time to recover and regroup. Additionally, the He 111 crews were now flying without adequate fighter escort deep into British territory. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters had limited range and could only accompany the bombers partway before having to turn back, leaving the slow, vulnerable bombers to face British fighters alone. Hans and Ernst walked across the tarmac toward their aircraft, designated M1 Plus GK. The ground crew had painted a small cartoon of a dachshund on the nose, a touch of humor in an increasingly grim situation. The flight engineer Obergefreiter Otto Schmidt was already running through the pre-flight checks. The radio operator, Gefreiter Paul Richter, loaded the ammunition belts into the defensive guns. As Hans climbed into the cockpit, he looked back at the airfield one more time. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows across the runway. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of another formation taking off. He wondered how many of those men would see another sunrise. Friedrich watched from the tower as the bombers lumbered down the runway one by one, gaining speed, lifting into the air with agonizing slowness. He raised his hand in a silent salute. In his other hand, he clutched a telegram that had arrived during the night. Another bomber wing had reported 70% casualties on their latest raid. 70%. The numbers were becoming unsustainable, but orders from Berlin remained unchanged. The bombing campaign would continue. The formation crossed the English Channel at 12,000 feet. Hans kept his eyes fixed on the lead bomber, maintaining tight formation as they had been trained. Below, the gray waters churned with whitecaps. Ernst sat in the bombardier's position in the glazed nose, watching for any sign of British fighters. The intercom crackled with routine position reports from the other aircraft. They were 20 minutes from the English coast when Paul's voice cut through the static. "Contacts, fighters at 2 o'clock high." Hans felt his stomach tighten. He had heard those words 7 times before, but the fear never diminished. The Spitfires came diving out of the sun, their machine guns blazing. The formation tightened instinctively, each bomber seeking protection from the others. The defensive gunners opened fire, tracer rounds arcing through the sky in desperate streams of light. The first Heinkel took hits immediately. Hans watched in horror as the bomber to his left, flown by his friend Lieutenant Werner Schneider, shuddered under the impact of cannon fire. Smoke poured from its port engine. Werner fought to maintain control, but the aircraft began losing altitude, falling away from the formation like a wounded bird. No parachutes emerged. The He-111 spiraled down toward the channel, trailing black smoke until it disappeared beneath the waves. "Focus, Hans," Ernst shouted over the intercom. "Stay in formation!" But the Spitfires were relentless. They had learned the Heinkel's vulnerabilities, attacking from below and behind where the defensive guns had limited coverage. Another bomber exploded in a massive fireball, debris raining down across the sky. Hans jerked the controls hard right as a fighter screamed past his canopy, so close he could see the pilot's face. Otto was firing the dorsal gun continuously, the hot brass casings bouncing around the cramped fuselage. "We cannot hold them off. There are too many." The formation was disintegrating. What had been 18 bombers was now 12, then 10. Some turned back, damaged and trailing smoke. Others simply vanished, consumed by fire or torn apart by concentrated fighter attacks. The British pilots showed no mercy. They had lost friends, families, homes to these German bombers. This was personal. Hans pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every bit of speed from the laboring engines, but it was not enough. The Spitfires were faster, more agile, flown by pilots defending their homeland with desperate courage. A cannon shell punched through the cockpit glass, missing Hans by inches. Freezing air roared through the shattered canopy. His hands were numb on the controls. "We are not going to make it to London," Ernst said, his voice eerily calm. "We need to drop the bombs and turn back now." Hans knew he was right. They had lost too many aircraft. The mission was a failure. But turning back meant admitting defeat, meant the deaths of their comrades had been for nothing. Berlin expected results, expected them to press on regardless of losses. The Luftwaffe High Command sat in comfortable offices, moving pins on maps, never seeing the terror in young men's eyes as their friends burned alive at 20,000 feet. "Make the decision, Hans," Ernst urged. "Save the crew." Hans made his decision. "All aircraft. This is Blue Leader. Break formation and return to base. Drop bombs on secondary targets. We abort the mission." The relief in the voices that responded was palpable. The surviving bombers scattered, each crew desperately seeking to escape the swarm of British fighters. Hands banked hard left, pushing the Heinkel into a shallow dive to gain speed. Ernst released their bomb load over empty farmland, lightening the aircraft. Every pound mattered now. Every second counted, but the Spitfires were not finished. Two fighters locked onto their tail, cannon fire stitching a line across the fuselage. Paul screamed as a round tore through his shoulder. The radio equipment exploded in a shower of sparks. Otto returned fire, his gun barking frantically, but the angle was impossible. The British pilots knew exactly where the blind spots were. Suddenly, from above, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 dove into the fight. The German fighter had been patrolling at maximum range, nearly out of fuel, when it spotted the desperate bomber. The pilot, Oberleutnant Victor Steiner, was a veteran with 23 kills. He fired a precise burst that sent one Spitfire spinning away, trailing smoke. The second British fighter broke off, unwilling to engage in a turning fight with the nimble Messerschmitt. Victor's voice crackled over the emergency frequency. "Bomber crew, follow me. I will escort you to the coast." "Stay low and fast." Hans felt a surge of hope. They were not alone. Someone was fighting for them. Victor weaved above them, scanning the skies for threats, his fuel gauge dropping into the red zone. He was sacrificing his own safety, burning precious fuel he needed to get home, to give these bomber crews a chance. If you are watching this story and wondering what happened next, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. These men faced impossible odds, and their story of survival is just beginning. The turning point is here, but the journey home is far from over. The coastline appeared through the haze. Hans had never been so grateful to see the gray waters of the channel. They were flying at wave-top height now, the bomber's belly nearly skimming the surface. Victor stayed with them until the French coast came into view, then waggled his wings in salute and turned back, his fuel nearly exhausted. Inside the damaged Heinkel, Paul was losing blood. Ernst had torn strips from his flight suit to bandage the wound, but they needed to land soon. The port engine was running rough, temperature gauges climbing into dangerous territory. Otto reported hydraulic fluid leaking from the landing gear system. Hans gripped the controls tighter. They had survived the fighters, but now faced a different challenge. Could he land this crippled aircraft? The airfield at Calais was 40 miles ahead, 40 miles that felt like 400. The bomber shuddered and groaned, metal fatigued and torn, held together by rivets and the desperate will of 5 men who refused to die over a foreign sea. The airfield at Calais appeared like a mirage through the smoke-stained windscreen. Hans radioed ahead, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Emergency landing. Wounded aboard. Hydraulics failing. The tower responded immediately, clearing all traffic and alerting medical teams. Fire trucks positioned themselves along the runway. Hans lined up his approach, fighting the sluggish controls. The port engine finally gave up, coughing black smoke before shutting down completely. The Heinkel yawed violently to the left. "Ernst, I need you up here," Hans shouted. Ernst climbed from the bombardier position and grabbed the co-pilot's controls. Together they muscled the aircraft level, both men pulling with all their strength. The runway rushed up to meet them. Hans tried to deploy the landing gear, but only the starboard wheel extended. The port side remained stubbornly retracted, the hydraulics completely dead. "We are coming in on one wheel and a prayer," Hans muttered. Otto braced Paul against the bulkhead, shielding him with his own body. The ground crew watched in tense silence as the crippled bomber descended. Hans cut the remaining engine at the last second. The Heinkel dropped hard onto the runway, the starboard wheel hitting first. For a moment it seemed they might maintain balance, but physics won. The aircraft tilted, the port wing dipped, and metal screamed against concrete. The bomber skidded sideways in a shower of sparks, pieces tearing away as it ground across the tarmac. Hans held the controls steady, keeping the nose up, preventing a catastrophic cartwheel. 300 meters. 200. 100. Finally, with a shuddering groan, the Heinkel came to rest in a cloud of dust and smoke. Medical personnel swarmed the aircraft. They pulled Paul out first, rushing him to the waiting ambulance. The rest of the crew climbed out on shaking legs, their flight suits soaked with sweat despite the cold. Hans stood looking at the wreckage of his aircraft, at the hundreds of bullet holes stitched across the fuselage, at the shredded port wing that had somehow kept them airborne. Hauptmann Weber arrived in a staff car, his face grim. "How many made it back?" Hans asked. "Out of 18 bombers that departed this morning, 7 returned. 11 aircraft lost. 66 men dead or missing." Hans felt the number hit him like a physical blow. 66 men. 66 families that would receive telegrams. 66 mothers, wives, children whose worlds would shatter. And for what? They had not even reached London. The mission was a complete failure. Over the next weeks, the pattern continued. Every raid saw catastrophic losses. The He-111 formations grew smaller, as replacement aircraft and crews could not keep pace with the casualties. Experienced pilots like Hans became rare commodities, expected to fly mission after mission while watching friends die around them. The Luftwaffe was bleeding itself dry against British defenses that grew stronger every day, while German bombers remained fundamentally unchanged, still too slow, still too vulnerable. Friedrich received orders from Berlin. The bombing would continue. Victory was certain. The numbers said otherwise. By December 1940, the truth could no longer be hidden behind propaganda and optimistic reports. The Heinkel He 111, once the pride of the Luftwaffe, had become a death sentence for its crews. The statistics were undeniable and horrifying. Of every 100 bomber crews that flew missions over Britain, 88 never completed their tour of operations. They were shot down, crashed, went missing over the Channel, or returned so damaged that subsequent missions proved fatal. Friedrich sat in his office reviewing casualty reports that now filled entire filing cabinets. The reasons for the catastrophic losses were painfully clear. The He-111 was simply obsolete for the mission it was being asked to perform. Its maximum speed of 270 miles per hour made it easy prey for fighters reaching 350 miles per hour or more. Its defensive armament, a handful of machine guns, was inadequate against cannon-armed British fighters attacking from optimized angles. The bomber's fuel tanks were not self-sealing, meaning a single incendiary round could turn the aircraft into a flying torch. But the technical failures were compounded by strategic disasters. The Luftwaffe had abandoned attacking RAF airfields just as British Fighter Command was on the brink of collapse. Instead, they switched to city bombing, giving the RAF time to recover. The decision to send bombers deep into British territory without adequate fighter escort was tactical suicide. The Bf-109 escorts could only accompany them part way before fuel limitations forced them to turn back, leaving the slow bombers defenseless during the most dangerous part of their mission. Hans had survived 12 missions, a statistical miracle. Paul had recovered from his shoulder wound, but was transferred to training duties, his combat days over. Ernst, Otto, and Hans continued flying together, a veteran crew that knew each other's thoughts without speaking. But they were anomalies in a system hemorrhaging experienced personnel. The final mission came in January 1941. Intelligence reported a critical convoy in the Thames estuary. Friedrich personally briefed the crews, his face haggard from months of witnessing young men die. He no longer spoke of glory or victory. He spoke only of survival, of protecting each other, of coming home. The raid was another disaster. British radar detected them 50 miles out. Spitfires and Hurricanes swarmed the formation like angry hornets. Hans watched 2 bombers explode before they even reached the target. He dropped his bombs through cloud cover, having no idea if they hit anything, then turned for home with fighters on his tail. They made it back, but 6 aircraft did not. Friedrich received the recall order that evening. Kampfgeschwader 53 was being withdrawn from Britain and reassigned to the Mediterranean theater. The Battle of Britain was effectively over, and Germany had lost. The vaunted Luftwaffe had been broken against British determination and superior defensive tactics. Hans stood beside his battered Heinkel for the last time. The cartoon dachshund on the nose was barely visible beneath layers of patched bullet holes. This aircraft had brought him home 13 times against impossible odds. How many others had not been so fortunate? The answer was written in blood across the skies of Britain: 88%. May 1945, the war was over. Germany lay in ruins, its cities reduced to rubble, its people starving, its military machine utterly destroyed. Hans Adler stood in what remained of his childhood home in Munich. The building was a skeleton, walls collapsed, roof gone, memories buried under tons of debris. He had survived the war, but barely. After the Battle of Britain, he had flown missions in North Africa, then on the Eastern Front. He had watched the Luftwaffe's decline from close range, seen newer aircraft models arrive too late, and in too few numbers to change the outcome. The He-111 continued flying throughout the war, gradually relegated to transport and training, roles as its combat obsolescence became undeniable. Ernst had been killed over Stalingrad in 1943. Otto died when his bomber was shot down during a night raid over Berlin in 1944, ironically killed by Allied bombers using the same tactics Germany had pioneered. Friedrich had been executed after the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. Though he had played no direct role, the regime was devouring itself by then, paranoid and desperate. Of Hans's original training class of 32 pilots, only 4 survived the war. The 88% casualty rate for He 111 crews had proven grimly accurate. Those who flew the early missions over Britain had faced the worst odds, sent into battle with inadequate equipment, poor intelligence, and strategic leadership that sacrificed lives for political objectives rather than military necessity. Hans had spent months in a British POW camp after being shot down in 1944. The British Guards, surprisingly, treated him with a measure of respect. They understood he had been a soldier following orders, not a war criminal. In the camp, he met RAF pilots who had fought against him over Britain. They shared stories, compared experiences, found common ground in the universal experience of aerial combat and the loss of friends. One British flight lieutenant told him something that stayed with Hans forever. Your He 111 crews were brave men sent on impossible missions. We respected you even as we shot you down. War is decided by old men in offices who never see the young men die for their mistakes. Now standing in the ruins of Munich, Hans understood the full weight of those words. The He 111 losses were not just about technical inferiority or tactical errors. They represented a systemic failure of leadership, a willingness to expend lives recklessly in pursuit of unattainable goals. 88% of his comrades had paid the ultimate price for that failure. Hans rebuilt his life slowly. He became a commercial pilot, flying the same routes over Europe that he had once bombed. He married, had children, and never spoke of the war unless asked. When he did, he spoke only of the men who did not come home, the friends whose faces still appeared in his dreams. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us what historical topics you would like us to explore next. These stories of courage, sacrifice, and hard lessons deserve to be remembered. Share this video so others can learn why 88% of He 111 bomber crews never made it home, and ensure their sacrifice is never forgotten. Until next time, remember the past so we never repeat its mistakes.